Anyone looking into getting into home theater usually starts off with a 5.1 setup. It doesn't take up a ton of space, and it can be more cost efficient rather than going for a full-blown 7-channel or 11-channel system. If you've got the space and the spare change, I think these Arendal Sound speakers we're about to talk about should be on your short list. What's going on, guys? I'm Shane, and before we get into discussing these speakers, if you're into audio and video equipment like these home theater speakers, or want to keep up on the latest and highest quality movies at home, consider hitting the subscribe button for new weekly content. Okay, so if you've watched my unboxing video, you probably know that these speakers were conceived in Arendal, Norway. That's where they got the company name, Arendal Sound. The guys over there were kind enough to let us be the first channel on YouTube, and maybe even in the US, to review their speakers. So we thank you for that. Now, if you guys have been following the channel for some time, you may know that we do a ton of movie reviews on the best home media formats, 4K Blu-ray and 3D Blu-ray. I know many of you don't care about 3D, but we still do. So having a high-performance audio setup so we can review the audio performance of a movie soundtrack was pretty high on our priority list. It just wouldn't make sense to do it on soundbar. Our main speaker setup for the past few years has been a full MEK S150 system, consisting of S150s across the front and SS150s for sides and surrounds. We've also been using 4 S80s to handle overhead channels. If you're familiar with the MEKs, they've been used in mixing studios to produce some award-winning soundtracks. They're known to have a very neutral yet very revealing sound quality, so details in a great audio mix and even lesser quality mixes stand out, for the good or the bad. When we got these Arendal 1723S speakers in, which are part of the S lineup, meaning small, they simply dwarfed every MEK speaker we had. The front channel speakers measure 23.6 inches high by 9.6 inches wide by 12.5 inches in depth. They also weigh 41 pounds each, so they're twice the height and twice the weight of my S150s. Keep in mind, the center channel is exactly the same as the left and right channels, with inverted connections around back and an inverted logo on the front of the grille. I'm assuming the logo that would be on the grille for the left and right speakers would also be found on the bottom, but I'm not really sure because the units that were sent to us, they didn't come with any grills. Each front speaker is in the mid-bass tweeter mid-bass configuration and can be used either ported or sealed using the included foam plugs. Frequency response goes down to 66 Hz sealed or 59 Hz ported. I opted to use them sealed to keep bass as tight and articulate as possible. Handling surround duties are the 1723 Surround S speakers. These guys were also huge compared to my SS150s. They're 15 inches in height by 14.6 inches wide by 6.8 inches deep, and they weigh 30 pounds. Again, these guys are almost twice the height and weight of my older surrounds, so they should be even more dynamic sounding since they have a response down to 59 Hz. Taking care of all the low-end frequencies is the 1723 Subwoofer 2. Arendal offers 4 subwoofer models, starting with the Subwoofer 1, 1.5, 2, and 3. This is their second from the top. The Sub 2 is fitted with dual opposing 13.8-inch drivers driven by a 1000-watt Avalanche DSP amplifier. Having opposing drivers will cancel out any resonances and keep cabinet movement down to a minimum. Design-wise, the subwoofer is made from 1-inch thick high-density fiberboard and a 2-inch thick front baffle to keep everything dense. This is a sealed subwoofer, and it's pretty big. It's 20.8 inches high by 16.5 inches wide by 19.6 inches deep, and it weighs 91.2 pounds. The Subwoofer 2 can reach down to 20 Hz using the EQ preset on the back of the sub, or 32 Hz using the EQ2 preset. After removing the MEKs from the wall mounts, I placed the Arendal speakers on a pair of 28-inch tall Definitive Technology studio speaker stands that I've had lying around the house for a few years. The center channel was placed on a 20-inch tall, I believe, Sana speaker stand, and tilted slightly upwards so it can reach both the first and second rows. All 3 speaker stands have been filled with sand, so they're heavy and dense. The surround speakers are mounted to the sides of the first row, slightly behind the seating area, as I do have 2 rows. I placed the subwoofer in the front right corner near the right speaker. Now, since these speakers are THX certified, I paired them with an Integra DRC R1 preamp processor with Rotel THX certified amplifiers. For movie playback, I used Panasonic's THX certified UB9000 4K Blu-ray player. I know THX isn't as mainstream as they were back in the ProLogic days, but I figure keeping everything THX in the audio chain would yield the advertised results. Since this is only a 5.1 setup, I play back strictly 5.1 audio soundtracks. If you're a fan of movies, then probably the most recent ones with outstanding 5.1 mixes will be from the Christopher Nolan 4K collection. To test out how a single subwoofer would perform in my room and how dynamic these speakers could be, I chose to pop in Interstellar. I'm sure you guys know where I'm going with this. Chapter 9 has got gobs of low-end bass. As they're entering the wormhole, the low end just vibrates and rattles everything that's loose in your room. Little creaks and beeps and just the ship flexing fills in your room's atmosphere. The triaxial surrounds do a fantastic job at spreading sound information down the sidewalls without managing to ever overpower another channel in the system. The musical score in Chapter 10 sounded amazing with its slow orchestral buildup. The pipe organ here sounds tremendous played at high levels, and the speakers never muddled the sound once. I was surprised how big this scene sounded because I've seen it multiple times. Rewatching it again was almost like watching it for the first time. Now, since these speakers can be used either sealed or ported, I took a couple measurements so we can see what happens with the foam plugs in sealed mode and here in ported mode. There is definitely an increase in bass around the 30 to 40 Hz range in ported mode. So it's safe to say you can get more than adequate bass without a subwoofer. Measuring the sub, I got a big bump in the 45 Hz area and a big drop around 20 Hz. Who are these speakers for? Using the euro to dollar calculator, this 5.1 speaker system will run you about $6,000. I get it. I know it sounds like a lot, but in the audio world, this little setup is on the affordable side. I mean, you can buy just one speaker that costs $6,000 by itself. When I compared them to my M&K system, I noticed some similar traits that I personally enjoy in a speaker. These aren't the type of speakers that color the sound with its own flavor. There's no emphasis on the high end or over-exaggeration on the low end. What I heard in my theater room, which I'd attribute to the waveguide, was an extremely wide soundstage. This is something I thought I had using the M&Ks, but using the Arendal speakers just opened up my room to the outside world. I heard more nuances in movies I've watched dozens of times. The extra dynamics and heavier bass response I got from these having larger cabinets just made my S150 sound anemic and a little underwhelming. Most of my listening was mainly movies, but I did throw in some music for 2-channel listening. Imaging on the 723Ss was rock solid. I had a couple people come over and they swore the center channel speaker was active. As reference, I own a pair of Martin Logan ESLXs. I love the transparency you get from electrostats, so I use them as a reference point for the 1723s. No, the Arendals weren't as musical as the Martin Logans, but I wasn't expecting them to be. They didn't quite have that three-dimensional sound floating in space imaging that I get from the stats, but what I got instead was a very dynamic, very spacious, very wide soundstage. Again, thank you waveguide. It's a little more forward sounding coming from the stats, but there are layers present in very good recordings. I listened to a mixture of jazz, pop, rap, classic rock, some reggae, and the Monitor S's handled everything with no problem. If you want to pop out the plugs and run them without a subwoofer, you definitely can. They can put out some seriously good mid-range without sounding chesty or harsh even when driven to reference levels. The soft dome tweeters handle the upper frequencies with some amazingly airy details. I feel if you want to get the most out of these speakers, you really want to feed them an ample amount of power. I used them with a Marantz 1607 receiver and they played well, but they took on a different character when I was using a dedicated amplifier. Switching back over to movies, the surround sound speaker envelopment is very much like the M&K surrounds. The SS150s are called tripoles since they are a mix of direct monopoles with dipoles on the sides. I'm thinking maybe Arendal was influenced by the M&K tripoles since their surround speakers operate the same way. You get the best of both worlds, direct sound coming from the front drivers with a mixture of diffuse sound at the same time. So it almost sounds like you have more than one pair of speakers on the sidewalls. Now per the THX spec, they do recommend using dipoles since having the side speakers wired out of phase keeps the surround channel from being localized, meaning you're not supposed to tell sounds are coming directly from it rather than coming from somewhere from the left or right side of the room. And this works well for the 5.1 setup because it makes the room seem larger than what it is. If you like a more directional surround experience, you can remove the jumpers in the back of each speaker, which cuts out the side drivers, leaving only the front drivers active. So this makes it a more traditional monopole or direct radiating speaker. This would be an important feature if you had an Atmos setup since Dolby recommends being able to hear exactly where the object place sound is coming from. Of course, you're going to have to try them with and without the jumpers to see what works best for your personal tastes. Now with every speaker sharing the exact same drivers, you get a perfect blend as sound effects move from speaker to speaker. This is why I always recommend when you go to choose speakers for a home theater, you always want to get them from the same manufacturer and from the same lineup. This is known as timbre matching. It's when speakers share the same tonal quality. You don't want one speaker sounding different from another and drawing attention to itself. The Arendal speakers are timbre matched perfectly, so sound movement among speakers was seamless. For example, take the movie Gravity. There's a scene towards the beginning of the movie where George Clooney's voice can be heard circling around the room. His voice carried the same weight and tonality between all 5 channels with 0 gaps during panning. If you haven't seen the movie, I'd highly advise you to do so. Now, if there's one area that I guess is lacking, and I only say this because my normal subwoofer is a PB16 Ultra, is the lack of infrasonics. That's the ultra low end bass you don't really hear, but you can feel. The hairs on my arms weren't really moving with this subwoofer. I know it's probably an unfair comparison, but this is what I'm used to. The bass you could feel rather than hear was just not there. Now, to be fair, if you've never felt bass like I'm describing, then the Arendal Subwoofer 2 is a knockout performer. It's rated down to 20 Hz, and depending on your room, you could measure lower. This thing throws out some seriously tight, hard-hitting transients. It belts your body very hard and has a very tactile presence. If you have it set up properly, you should hear no boominess or sloppiness. It also had no problem filling in my space, but if I had to, I could have probably smoothed things out even better. I used the EQ presetting 1 for most of my movie watching since bass extension is lower, and I kept it at EQ setting 2 for music listening. Now be sure your crossovers are set properly, which will give you a seamless blend with the front speakers. Bass attack was great when I had popped in some Red Hot Chili Peppers with quick stops and hard hits of bass lines. It's a musical subwoofer for sure, in part to it having a sealed enclosure. And the dual driver setup lets this thing play extremely loud without it imploding on itself. I did feel it excelled more for music than for movies, but depending on your room and your system, it could be different for you. One more thing to mention about the subwoofer is the lack of it being app controlled. SVS has app controlled subs, and even Martin Logan has an app for their subs. They can even use room correction on certain models. I really miss not having an equalizer built into the subwoofer. If I wanted to dial in the subwoofer using Room EQ Wizard, I'd have to do it with my processor's room correction. And if you don't have room correction, then placement really is a critical thing. I suppose not having an app isn't the worst thing, but once you have it, it's really kind of hard to go back. Maybe the next iteration they'll incorporate it. As a whole, the entire system has an incredibly cohesive sound field. It handled the entire spectrum of movies I threw at it, from intimate sound mixes like Roma to huge blockbusters like Transformers. It captures the quietest of passages to the most dynamic peaks. Even when driven to reference levels, which is normally too loud for my ears, the 1723 is never distorted or cracked under pressure. This can't be said of other popular brands that I've heard. Now, this is part of their small lineup if you compare them to the Tower Option and the standard 1723 monitor speakers. However, if you compare them to, say, a Klipsch RP600 or KEF R-Series bookshelf, these 1723Ss are nearly twice the size, and those are smaller bookshelves as well. So if you're thinking that these will be living room decor friendly, you may want to check your space requirements because they can be a little imposing. But hey, I love it. I should also mention the finish of these speakers. They come in white or black in both glossy or matte finish. I know this is a personal thing, but I opted to go with the matte black in my home theater just to keep reflections down to a minimum. I also think these are more of a satiny finish rather than a matte finish because there is a very slight sheen to them, so you may want to keep that in mind when choosing colors. Now, I can't recommend these speakers enough. Unfortunately, there's no way you can listen to these in the US, at least nowhere that I'm aware of. But they do offer a 60-day buy and try period, and from the time they ship to the time they arrive was only about 3 to 4 days. So shipping was super quick. They also come with a huge 10-year warranty. That's some pretty good peace of mind knowing they'll be covered for that long, and that Arendal is confident enough in their product that they think they'll perform for that amount of time. So that's the 1723 Monitor S 5.1 system. If it sounded this good with only 5 speakers, I can't wait to try it out in a full immersive setup. Now I just have to wait for the other speakers to arrive. Thanks for checking out the video, guys. If you have any comments or thoughts on these speakers, let us know down below. Are the Arendal Sound speakers on your shopping list? And what else are you considering? Be sure to check us out on social media, and if you want to support the channel and get exclusive content and giveaways, then stop by our Patreon page. Like and share the video, and of course subscribe if you haven't already. And we'll see you guys again in the next video.